Welcome to Hack Your Career. I'm Bev Benson, Manager of Cybersecurity Education here at AttackIQ. In this live stream, my goal is to introduce you to all sorts of careers in cybersecurity by sharing the stories of the people behind them. Today's guest is an award-winning cybersecurity executive with over 20 years of technology and cybersecurity experience. I am thrilled to introduce and welcome Marlys Rodgers, CISO at CSAA Insurance Group. Marlys, welcome.
Hello, Bev.
How
Thank you
are
for having
you?
me. Good, great.
So glad to have you here. So we're going to get started because I have some wonderful questions and our audience is definitely very excited to learn more about you.
Sure.
Quickly to our audience, please, if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the comments section and I'll be reviewing them throughout this presentation. So Marlys, we'll start with you. In looking at your background, looks like you got your start at biotech as an account executive at NDC Health. What made biotechnology enticing to you?
So that was an interesting kind of start to my career. I've actually been working, you said 20 years, but I've been working full-time for 30 years because I had to work full-time through college. And, you know, it was interesting because what drew me first to NDC Health, which actually is now part of Wolters Kluwer, if anyone's familiar with Wolters Kluwer, really what drew me to the company was the fact that it was really all about data. And, you know, you think back then that's a long time ago to start thinking about how do you optimize information. And the company bought and sold pharmaceutical data. And they worked with a lot of pharma companies, biotech companies, as you mentioned. I mean, I was there working with Genentech and interacting with them when they were at the, I would say not the beginning stages, but sort of the mid-range stages of their breast cancer drug. So It was very interesting to engage in the industry. There's a lot that goes into obviously getting drugs approved, but there's even more that goes into understanding the data that comes out of pharmaceutical sales. And you think, oh, it's just for sales numbers. Actually, it's also used to do predictive modeling and things for drug reps and the way that doctors behave, because there's a lot of blind spots to the industry, which is, by the way, a theme, right? We all have blind spots when it comes to data that we're trying to get to. So that's really what, drew me to the company and certainly, where I felt like I could gain a lot of knowledge in that area, especially around data, which basically has been my whole career after that.
Okay, awesome. And so looking at your time as an account executive, do you have any lessons learned from that role at NDC Health that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I would say first and foremost, I didn't want to be an account executive ultimately. So it's funny when I was there was actually a couple of roles I had, but account executive was kind of the top tier role in order to start working with customers, and which was a fun job. It was great. You got to interact with all of these, marketing and pharma, executives. So you really got a great level of insight, which is one of the appeals to the job. But it quickly taught me that I'm not a salesperson. I can sell ideas. And of course, now I've got to sell ideas all the time and ask for money. So maybe doing it on the other side. But I think the biggest learning from there, other than, just learning about data, learning about the industry, was really just that you can rise to a certain level and go after that and do that. But then once you're in it, if it's not meant for you, you really have to call it and kind of pivot and just say yes to other things and not try to just keep making something work that you're just not passionate about.
I love that. I love that. And so that helps me to pivot to my, my next question, that you went from NDC Health to American Express. Well, you remained there for almost 20 years and held a variety of leadership roles. What advice would you give to individuals looking to enter into or advance within the field of cybersecurity?
So, it's interesting. There, you just talked about that journey. And if you look at the jobs and things that I had at American Express, I didn't, even at American Express, I did a lot of things that touched it. My job didn't get to being fully focused 100% of the time, really, until the last couple of companies and positions. And so I think the advice that I would give a lot of, people coming into it is there's so many points of entry into getting into security. And, for me, it was really around, like you said, I pivoted from one company to the next. Well, why did that happen? It happened because at that time, the company that I happened to be at was using a particular tool set. It was new to the industry. It was a reporting tool set, still exists today, used by many companies. American Express was using it. And that's really what got me in, right? And so that thematically is a part of my career, which is, okay, one thing leads to another, right? And leads to another and leads to another. And so I think if you're someone coming new into the field and it's your stated desire, like you went to school for it. I didn't go to school for security. But if it's your stated desire, obviously you've got a career path and there's a lot of different challenges coming into the field, but that. For me, my career path has kind of been a winding road of just different opportunities. And so I think the advice that I would give, because we need it so badly, we need talent, and talent isn't just going to come from people who went to school for it, right? So I think the focus is just knowing, start to study it. There's so many things that are available today in terms of education, courses that you can access, different industry sources. And the plain and simple fact is everything around security has a published standard. If you start to understand what those published standards are and the compliance requirements, you really have a good foundation in understanding what those base requirements are to get you in as you may be getting maybe more formally educated or getting hands-on in the space. So for me, it was just, kind of weaving my way in, finding those opportunities as I was, like you said, when I was at American Express, one of the things I had responsibility for was rolling out workplace solutions to 100,000 employees globally. Well, my best friend was the security team. You had to work with them hand in hand. And in fact, to this day, the CISO for American Express is one of my mentors, and I count him amongst my friends. So it's definitely something where if you can start to, come into the field, take those opportunities and just not be afraid. It's not a scary place. And the other thing I would say too is no one knows everything. So it's always a constant daily, of learning. And so my advice is just to stay current. There's so many places to get that education, get the information, and stay, on top of what's happening in the industry. And that's just a great way to kind of enter the field and look for those types of opportunities.
Great. And you mentioned that your career was kind of a winding journey. And so I want to take a moment just to share with our audience some of the roles that you held at American Express so they can better understand that winding journey that you took. So I have that you served as a lead project manager, director for technologies development, vice president for end user computing and global infrastructure, vice president for operational risk management. And so I think it was very important to share those roles so that our audience who's very interested, again, either entering cybersecurity or advancing while in the field can see that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one point that I kind of call out is the first job that I had when I transitioned from my last company into American Express, I was on the business side for the first 5 years. And, I always tell the story that when I had a product, it was for all of global corporate services customers. So you think very, large scale global companies, high demand, many requirements. And I really wanted to better understand what was going on in the technology side. So I just started asking a lot of questions to understand it. And, the sort of counterpoint I got from my IT partners is, if you want to know so much about it, why don't you just move over to IT?
Love it.
And I had a wonderful mentor that, at that time she was in IT. I'd been working with her on some of the projects. And when I got asked that question, I said, okay, fine, I will. And so actually turned out I moved over, worked for her, and took the opportunity then to be within tech doing all kinds of things, mergers and acquisition assessments and, working with the OCC on regulatory, delivery of, large scale kind of inventory tools. And then got into the end user computing and the workplace technology space where, then the doors just open when you're, thinking about, well, what's a safe way with a very conservative company when it came to, data and data protection to actually place some of that data in the cloud. And what does that look like? Because they had never done that before. And how many opinions does that take? And who needs to provide input? Because that whole space doesn't have necessarily, a set of requirements and a business partner. And so it was kind of looking at the different opportunities. And that's actually where I got very, as I mentioned, very steeped in knowledge around some of the security things that, back then it was like, what's a man in the middle attack? Because we wanted to deploy, a secure container and have BYOD, which was unheard of. That would have never been allowed, without the technologies, but also without that partnership with security. And so, it's definitely one of those where just as things opened up, I just said yes. And the last job, the operational risk management, completely moved from tech and followed who was the CISO. She moved into the chief operational risk role. And she said, hey, you really need to understand risk if you're going to kind of move this forward. I see you have an affinity for it. Look at how we think about enterprise risk for a company like American Express. And how do we develop programs and processes and tools and technologies basically to kind of drive that forward and make those right decisions and create transparency, which, funny enough, ultimately became the foundation for what I do, every day. So it's, it was a fun journey. It was a great company to work for because it did offer so many of those opportunities. But I think that when you're in any field, in particular in security, you can come almost from any kind of walk of life and jump in and be someone to really help too, because we need a lot of help.
Yes, I totally agree. The field, I try to encourage people as often as I can to learn as much as they can about cybersecurity and join us in that fight to keep our data, our infrastructure safe. You also stated, I want to just backtrack a little bit. You talked about fear and you talked about being able to overcome that. If you can tell me of a time in which you faced some of that fear and how did you challenge yourself? How did you move past that?
Well, so, I think fear crops up for everyone at different points. And I think I'll say this with experience and age, I feel it a lot less because you realize ultimately everything's going to work out. And, you really have to kind of live in that present moment and deal with it. I think where fear has kind of gotten to a point where I had to really sit and address it were moments where, like, for instance, when, the leader came to me and said, well, I really think you can pivot. That was a total pivot in my career. And there was this moment as I started it where I felt I was getting the concepts, but these are like regulatory required for a global company and one of the top brands. You start creating this, like, what if I mess this up and am I going to take down, the company if I do this wrong? And there were moments where I'm interacting with the New York Fed those are important conversations, and you have to, be transparent and handle them, really effectively, and obviously not create headaches and homework for the company because maybe you're nervous or something. And so I think in those moments, it's just taking the deep breath and kind of looking back at moments where you knew you could do things. And also, you kind of have to put out of your mind the sort of weight of the moment.
Okay.
You can appreciate it, but the reality is you're going to prepare in the exact same way that you do for a great conversation like this, as I might sit down with someone who's a regulator. At the end of the day, you're just needing to be your authentic self. You need to be truthful, transparent, and be comfortable. And if you're able to do that consistently, you just have to take that moment to remind yourself, I've done this before, I can do it again. Take a deep breath and just keep going. And you start to build up that sort of resistance, right? Because we often hear about this sort of imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And I think oftentimes it's because we build up this idea that, the thing that you're doing is really amazing and exciting. But the reality is, for as many times as you've done really something hard that you didn't think you could do, you've done that before. So you can do it again and just keep building on it and building on it, because the next time that you do that, you're just going to be that much more comfortable. And you know your limits, where you need to stretch, you know yourself. And so it's a lot of just kind of reminding yourself of those different, I would say, kind of mantras in those moments where you don't have to, overthink things. Okay. I think that's the other problem, is we overthink things so much. And it's like, hey, you're about to actually sit down and do something you've never done before. How about enjoy it for a second?
Right, and be excited.
Yeah, exactly.
Be excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thinking about, we currently are in a state within our entire world where we have a lot of unfilled cybersecurity roles. What do you think we can do as an organization to help prepare that new talent? You talked about encouraging, you talked about folks taking risks and being willing to pivot. Any other suggestions that you have to share on really how that we can best meet that need and have women and women of color and minorities to really get in there and excel?
Absolutely. And by the way, let's add in LGBTQ.
There you go. LGBTQ.
To that group. We need a lot of diversity, because a lot
Absolutely.
I'm a huge passionate advocate for that. As many different backgrounds and people that we can bring into this space, the better. How can we prepare them? I think first and foremost, it takes the actual cyber community to, actively advocate and get out, and actually work with people. And by people, I mean from very young ages, going to schools, educating people, making sure that from a very young age, that we are getting people interested in the industry and sort of demystifying it a little bit. So I've done, a number of talks. I'm always kind of interfering with the kids' schools. I have two sons. And of course, they'll be fine. I always tell them, like, you'll be fine, but let me help you. But also, let's go and help some other people, really understand this so we can bring them up. I think, in terms of preparation, I think a lot of it and how we can help them prepare is, like I said, I think it's education, it's demystifying it. It's also making sure that people understand what paths are available to come into the field. In fact, I always use this example. There's a woman on our team that came over when she started. I work for an insurance company. She had worked, actually came into the company, had a completely different background. She was recruited to come in. She was a customer facing person, got really interested, and, took a dive into the sort of deep end of security and said, I'd really like to understand this. And came in as organizational change and doing training. And she's really gotten in depth. And so I think that there's just a lot of different ways that we can get people into the field. And also, like I said, I think a lot of it sits in the hands of, current cyber professionals. to go out and, like I said, just start recruiting. We've got internships, but I think a lot more companies need to do that. And also, even just within the company, go to different groups, find out where people have a passion for this. The other part of it too is, I think there's a sort of a common set of maybe characteristics of people that come into this field, because you don't just come into it because, oh, it just seems really interesting and, oh, that's cool and sexy. That's the initial draw. But I think once people really start to understand the fundamental threats, not just to, your immediate company or to, individuals, but also our nation.
Yes.
We're doing something that is fundamental to protecting, different elements of our infrastructure, how we stay, afloat in terms of being able to make money as a country, and staying, ahead of that, and helping to protect things like, water supplies and
Yes.
things like that. And so it's really important. And I think the characteristics of people that are interested in a field like this, there's a deep sense of passion, a deep sense of being a helper, someone who is, this isn't a day job. We know that, in the middle of the night, Twitter starts blowing up with Log4j, right? That was a Friday night in December. Obviously, there'd been chatter before, but, that's where people just spent the majority of their time for many months. Now there's a new one. Now there's going to be another one. And so I think the sort of preparation is also seeking people out and helping them also to just understand what the space is and what it takes.
Awesome. Now, you've talked a little bit about demystifying cybersecurity. Give me a sentence or two that you've shared in the past, helping others understand what cybersecurity is, how vast the field is.
So I think what I talk about are kind of the basic elements, which is, well, what is it that we're trying to protect? We're trying to protect data. What's at the core of data? It's people's privacy. It's private information. It's proprietary information to companies. It's things of value that we're digitally trying to protect. And so how do you do that? Well, there's a whole way you can do it, but I'd say the part that I really try to emphasize with people, education-wise, either technical or not, is there's always a risk-based approach to how we make decisions in cyber. The idea isn't to say, no, you cannot do all of these things and you shut down the business. It's also not to say we're going to implement every single best-in-class solution, because that's not necessarily required either. And so it's really talking to people about what it means to understand risk of decisioning, what it means to, obviously there are things that are requirements from a compliance or regulatory perspective, but it's also getting people to understand, there's a lot of noise that you hear in the media. What does that mean? Yeah, sometimes it's as fundamental as you click on a link in an email and that can introduce malware. Well, what's malware? It's basically, think of it as the bad virus that hits your system, and in that moment can do any number of things, including taking over your CEO's account, for instance, right? And what does that mean? And where does that go? But at the basis of it, it really comes down to, what are you trying to protect? And what are the risk-based set of decisions that really create the right level of protection at any given moment for the company, or whatever you're trying to protect?
Wonderful.
Fill in the blank.
Thank you. Thank you. And so you currently hold role of CISO at CSAA Insurance Group. Now, the role of CISO is becoming extremely popular, and it is sought after by many. What experience from your previous roles prepared you for this particular role as CISO?
I'd say I feel like a little bit of all of them, but the ones I would point to are the combination of the sort of global technical delivery I did at American Express, the time I spent doing the enterprise risk, because you really saw not just cyber risk, but how that risk interacts with all the other risks at a company. And then the work that I actually did at PayPal, working with countless business units and understanding their control sets, how they were implementing both their technology and their information security control. So those were ones I'd say that were essential to, really doing what I do today.
Okay. Now, what advice can you share with those aspiring to be a future CISO?
I would say that it looks like a harder job than it is. I'll
Okay.
say that. I think a
Tell me
lot of
more.
people, yeah, I think a lot of people look at it. I remember saying to my friend and mentor, I said, "How do you get any sleep?" And he just said, "Well, he made some jokes with me, and then he just said, listen, at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control.
Okay.
And if you have a good line of sight to what it is do you have great people that you work with that are on your team? Do you have, a good sort of fundamental basis that as you're leading, are you also teaching and educating the people that are on your team about how to think about risk and the kinds of decisions to be made? Because you can't make all of the decisions. You're also not going to know every element of every technology that you have. It's just not possible. Plus, it's not necessary. In the CISO role, what you're really doing is you're communicating, you're educating, and you're working a lot with the board of directors, with your executive leadership team to understand their level of risk acceptance, what their business goals are, so you can enable what they are doing, but then also being in the position of providing transparency. And transparency doesn't mean that, hey, the world's on fire and you're trying to scare everyone. And so it's also about being an effective communicator,
Okay.
a lot of diplomacy. So, yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
That would be my advice. Get familiar with all of those things. If you think it's just about the security technology or being super technical, no, that's not the role that CISOs play today and shouldn't play. They really have to go kind of broad and deep.
I thank you for sharing that. Because I think some individuals may, as you're demystifying cybersecurity, you're now also beginning to demystify the role of a chief information security officer, so that those who aspire to have that role can really understand that it's not only the technical aptitude, but it's also, the business skills. It is being an effective communicator. It's collaborating. So thank you for sharing those words of wisdom. Now, I see that you are on some advisory boards.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thank you for your service, particularly at AttackIQ, because you are on our advisory council. So we thank you for that. But I would love to learn, at what point did you say, yes, have the confidence that, yes, I can be on an advisory board, and yes, I can add value. Tell us about your experience with advisory boards.
So I've really enjoyed advisory boards, and you're right. I am interacting on a couple of them in different capacities. I think that what's really interesting and informative is you're working with a community of peers in different industries with different levels of experience. And the great thing, about security is everyone has a high degree of being very humble. And so there's a lot of, what would you do in this scenario? Even though you're talking to someone who may be doing this 15 years, there's still the questions, or how do you handle this? Because I'm challenged with this. I don't understand this, or how is your company addressing this? How are you thinking about coming after this? It's a great opportunity to not only get that information, but I think the other part that's really helpful is you're also offering in those conversations, like to AttackIQ, you're hearing from, industry experts about ways that we are challenged, so that you as a company can start to, hit the sweet spot in terms of different capabilities. And so it really is a great two-way street when it comes to advisory. How did I know I was ready? I don't think you ever know. I think a lot of times it's really about saying yes to things. And then if you get involved in something and you don't feel it's right for you, or you don't feel you can offer the helper sport, you can always say no. You can always explain that. But I think you're better off in just saying yes to things so that you really have the opportunity to jump in and start to learn and start to contribute, because it really is, like I said, that two-way street.
That two-way street, yeah. And you talk a lot about the power of choice, the willingness to say yes. I think that's so very important for everyone to really understand and be willing to give of themselves and give of others. Absolutely. Now, one of the things that you've also mentioned is the fact that you've had mentors along the way. And I'd love for you to share, one lesson learned from a mentor that you would love to share with our listeners.
A really great lesson that I learned, actually, the person that was my mentor and brought me into the chief operational risk role, she's actually the head of compliance at American Express now. And one of the things as I was transitioning and she talked to me, I remember I'd just been in the role a couple of years and I was thinking about taking a different role. And she said, you really have to make sure that everyone else's understanding of a situation is caught up to yours, because your brain does work well with risk. You understand it. How do you get others to the point where you're at and help them catch up? And so it was just great advice in that, not that I thought I was the most effective communicator at that point in my career, but I didn't realize that actually fundamentally it was more around stopping, pausing, educating people, and getting them to the point where they could understand something. And I feel like that was such a great lesson, because honestly, it's something I do every day now in security, because not everyone knows or has to know all the ins and outs. But how do you help them frame or establish context to, better understand, the kinds of risks and things that we're facing today?
Thank you. And would you recommend others to seek out mentors?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, please. Who can survive without mentors and advocates? And I think that mentorship is a great thing, even if it's temporary or long-term. It's one of the most powerful relationships you can have professionally.
A question has come in. And a question I love to present to you is, what do you feel is your biggest success over the years in your career?
Gosh, I would say being open to every opportunity and then diving in, because the outcome of it wasn't just learning, it was also just working with amazing people and how much learning I got from those people. I mean, I'm surrounded in every role with amazing people. And if I'd said no or was afraid to dive in, I would have missed those chances. And I mean, I look at my LinkedIn as almost like your high school class, right? Of all of your friends and people that I can literally point at anytime someone comments or if I post something. And it's like this list of like, oh, I remember that person. Oh, I can't, and I need to reconnect, and how much I learned from that person. And so I'd say that's my greatest, I would say, success has just been pushing fear aside, but then, really lapping up all of those different opportunities and all of the people.
Yeah, I say lean in and do it anyway.
Exactly.
Do it anyway. Yeah. Now, in closing, I personally have a mantra, and it is dare to dream. I would love to hear if you have a mantra or quote that keeps you inspired that you would like to share with our audience.
I feel like my daily Instagram feed is my daily inspiration. I would say a personal mantra of mine that sort of roots me in a lot of situations is never ask of others what you're not willing to do yourself.
I love that.
And it really speaks to the idea of teamwork and being a part of, could be a part of an incident call, and you're on the call overnight, and you may not be someone directly contributing, but being a part of it and helping support and doing things with your teams arm in arm is really important to me. And it's also just given me tons of opportunities to learn things I would have never been exposed to. So I think, and that's where I find inspiration, is in learning.
Okay, awesome. Listen, Marlys, this has been a fantastic time for me to get to know you, for our audience to learn more about you and your fantastic career, and all of the wonderful things and advice that you have the opportunity to share. So on behalf of AttackIQ, I just want to say thank you for spending 30 minutes with us, again, and just sharing a little bit of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bev, for the opportunity. It was great to speak with you.
Yes, thank you. Enjoy your day.